Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Jenny Aiello, and this is With Love, Jenny, a podcast where we meet ourselves right in the heart of our vulnerability and authenticity. In this sacred space where it's just you and I dive into real life, rich with wisdom and opportunities for deep healing. I explore what it means to truly connect to ourselves, to each other, and to something much greater than us all. In each podcast, I like to meet life right where it touches us most, in our tenderness, in our truth, in our struggles and our strength. So wherever you are on your journey, or whatever it is that you're carrying, no matter how light or heavy, just know I'm so grateful that you're here with me today. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to a brand new episode of With Love, Jenny. I could not be more excited for the discussion my guest and I are about to have. If you're a parent or grandparent or anyone who has a role in the life of a child, especially how they learn, you don't want to miss this one. We will be talking about how to navigate options out there for educating our children when you're navigating so many choices and possibly having a child struggle. First of all, it's been over 3 decades ago that I entered into the world of learning and education for my kids. My daughter started kindergarten in 1987, I think. I'm aging myself. And my youngest son just finished up his education so far by getting a master's degree a couple of years ago. So I've either been making big mistakes or making good choices, but educating 5 children was a very slippery slope for us, for my husband and I. If only I knew of a resource like today's guest, it would have made it so much easier. She has created a very successful company that takes the drama and worry out of finding exactly what your kids might need to thrive, and then allow them to feel the success in and out of the classroom. As you know, as my listeners, I'm going to begin with a story, and because, that's how we do it here. But I am going to tell you a little bit about my journey, because if only I had a resource. And so I'm going to share a little bit. Having 5 children, my background of getting them in school looked like this. We had homeschool co-ops. We've had public school. We've had private school. We've had private Christian schools. We've had Montessori school experiences. So there was a whole lot of different approaches depending on what each child needed, because our kids had very different brains. My kids, none of them matched in their personality and their learning style, which made it pretty hard. When I went to school, even longer ago than all that, it was simple. You just went to kindergarten, elementary school, then you went to junior high and high school, and then if wanted, you went to college and beyond. There wasn't a lot of options outside of that. We didn't have, in my hometown, private schools or special learning opportunities. We just we followed the flow of the educational system. But today, we have so many options, and we also have children coming up through the educational system with new brains, with special needs, with very unique learning styles. And I can imagine for a parent today and watching my kids put their kids into school and get them going, it's challenging. So we want to figure out how to best support the student, but also the teachers and the parents, because as you know, it takes a village, right? All our kids are out of school right now. And they went all the way through that with 2 have master's degrees, 1 has an undergraduate bachelor's degree, and then the other 2 went into a trade for different reasons, but have a promising career ahead of them without further education. And part of that was directed because there was undiagnosed ADHD and learning disabilities that made them not feel competent in the classroom. So I don't know if you can relate to any of that. That's my story. I wish I was having this conversation with this special lady in 1987. I think it would have changed their lives and put a different trajectory together for them. As I said, it's all turned out to be okay, but it was a lot. So who is this mystery guest? Let me introduce Mary Miele. I met Mary a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. Gosh, has it been that long, Mary? She came to a women's retreat. And right after that women's retreat, my husband and I met with Mary over the phone. We were doing some follow-up and she was helping us with a few things. But Mary is the sole reason I even have this podcast. So it's like, what took me so long to get Mary on this podcast? I don't know, but we thought of it and implemented it. So here we are. She is a seasoned educator, a learning specialist, founder of Evolved Education Company, and is thrilled to announce the release of her 15th publication. Yes, she spits out books like crazy. The name of her most recent publication is The Power of Questioning, a problem-solving model for helping students learn better. And with her over 3 decades of experience in education and a career that's completely dedicated to supporting students and families in schools, Mary has become a trusted authority in whole child education, school placement, and executive functioning. Her new book, which I'm eager to read, offers a transformative approach to teaching and learning. It equips the educators, the parents, and students with tools to unlock potential through the art of asking questions. So as a coach, you can imagine how excited I got when she told me this topic for her latest publication, because I'm all about the power of asking questions and how brilliant is it to apply this model into the learning and the education system. So before I turn the mic over to Mary, I just have to again say that while she is heavy in her accomplishments and she's done a lot, you guys, and she does things so fast that you would say, Mary, write a book about this, and next weekend it's being published. So she's one of the most accomplished people I know, but she's also one of the most beautiful souls I have had the privilege to meet and call my friend. You know, ever since she walked in and I gave her that first hug at a women's retreat, I felt a kinship to her, like we've known each other much longer than we have. And I'm just grateful because she also challenges me to step out of my comfort zone and learn something new. I knew nothing about the podcast world, and I took her lead and said, I'm just going to pretend I'm Mary. And the next thing you know, With Love, Jenny was created. And so if she hadn't have said that, like threw that out there on that Zoom call, I would never have done this in a million years. So her latest book is now available. So wherever you buy your books, go get her 15th publication of The Power of Questioning. But right now, Mary, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to ask questions and then let you take off. Is that okay with you?
Sounds amazing. And what, has it really been 2 years? I mean, I don't even know, but time is flying. I really have to say, I feel it has got to be our whole lives, because it doesn't feel like it could only be 2 years ago that we were doing that retreat. Absolutely a reconnection of some kind. So that's for sure.
For sure. So, well, my first question is just to ask you, you've written so many books and you are I see your living passion for what you do, but what is your reason for writing this particular book?
Well, I'm always interested in helping students. And this model actually came to me from a business coach who I was working with. And I actually cite him in the book, Deepak Sharma is my business coach. And he actually gave me a questioning model to use within my company to solve a problem I was having. And this was the problem I was having. I was really holding all of the responsibility, which Jenny knows a lot of my journey. So, I'm the oldest of 4 girls and in a family where I assumed a lot of responsibility early on and became very comfortable in that seat, right? And so, of course, I've now fast forward, I have this company, and of course, I have a lot of responsibility. Funny how that is, right? And what I was doing was, though, I was holding all of these problems in my brain and not necessarily having a model or a way to give the problem-solving process to those who work with me here in this company. And so he said, hey, you know what? I have this problem-solving model that you could learn about. It's nothing really new or anything, but I think you could use it in your company. And it basically went like this. You have a goal, and then what you do is you have an obstacle that you have in meeting that goal. Let's say you want to have 4 leads this month, right? And you only have 1. Well, your obstacle is you need 3 more leads. And often what we'll do is we'll say, but I need 3 more leads. And you'll say a statement like this. Well, if you just say a statement, your brain actually just sort of stops right there. Does it? It just is. It is an I am statement, right? I am this, and that's it. But by turning it into a question, our brain actually gets a little bit troubled. It gets irritated. It doesn't like to be in this state of not knowing. So it actually just automatically, you might all know this, right? But it automatically goes and tries to find the answer. So, and then you know how it is with soul work, right? Like as soon as you actually ask a question or reframe a story for yourself, all of a sudden, all of the evidence is there in front of you. And you're kind of like wowed because it was there all along, but you just didn't really pay attention to it because you were just singularly thinking, maybe, something like this. So, I mean, that's happened to me in coaching often. So this I really understood, right? I got this idea. I was like, oh yes, this makes really good sense. And, then he says to me, well, so you ask a question and now what you have to do is you have to hypothesize something that will answer the question, and you have to run the experiment and try and see if it actually meets the, the objective. And he said, that's actually the fun of it. And I'm thinking like, yeah, I know all about that. Let me tell you something. If I look back, and this is where, of course, my brain went, was, wait a second, Deepak. I've been doing this since I was very young. I can tell you right now. And I write a lot. So, I have these journals and such of my younger years of teaching. I used to especially write a lot because it's how I process. And I was writing about this student. In student teaching, you also had to keep journals and give them to your student teacher mentor person. And I had this one instance where, right at this time, it was probably the late 1990s, really, really early in my career. And I was at a center and we had just started to label kids as something called PDD. And it was pervasive developmental disorder, I think was the way it was, but don't quote me on it. But it was really the precursor to autism. It wasn't really known as autism, but that's the symptoms sort of presented that way. And the way that we were treating it was through ABA therapy, which if you know, it's where you sort of program a child to do the things they're not doing by giving them incentives and tokens. And I remember, and I wrote about this in the book, there was a little boy, and I can remember his face. I don't really like to use their actual names in my book anyway, because I like to preserve everyone's stories. But let's just say I could totally picture this kid. And I'm sitting here I'm being the good, dutiful Mary, putting my tokens out and, trying to get this child to really just look at me. We're doing eye contact stuff. And this kid is just looking outside and he just is gazing at the trees and the movement of the, we had in the urban environment where I live in New York, there isn't a lot of those spaces, but in this center, there was this outdoor space with a lot of trees and the kids would go out to play every day. And he would just look out there and just long. And the question in my mind was, I wonder if I brought him outside, if this would go any differently, But I didn't have enough confidence at that time in my career to really act on this. It was just something that I wrote about. I didn't really notice about it until I had Deepak put this model in front of me. And I said, wait a second, I've been doing this since I was little. And I went back and I'm looking and I'm like, yeah, look at me. I'm asking questions. Look at that. But I didn't do anything with it, and it's okay. But then I kept looking and I was looking at other students, and I literally have in the book, like, this one student came to me, and this is such a wild, weird story, but she was in 8th grade and she wouldn't talk in school. This was in early 2000s. And yet her mom was like, she talks fine at home. I don't know what you're talking about. And nobody knew about this thing called selective mutism at the time, right? And it was that. But I wrote in the book, like, how can I get Kara to speak up in school? So like I asked this question and I'm taking this kid into these small rooms. I'm like, maybe if we start relating on things, I try that hypothesis out. It doesn't work. I take her for a walk. That doesn't work. I'm trying all these things and it just nothing kind of works. But I give the question to the mom, and the mom ends up running it down the road with other people. And this is a cool concept. And this is why I love this model so much, because it's called, you got to sometimes increase your threshold of knowledge, right? Like, Jenny, I just called you like after this weekend because I needed to call Jenny to increase my threshold of knowledge. I'm like, I had this meditation and something came up, right? And it was this meditation. There were a couple of them, but there was the one about the boat, and I was like going down the boat and I didn't have a guide. And I'm like, what does that mean? And then somebody in the group pointed it out that I don't like to ask for help. Well, we already know, we've told some story about Mary here, and I said, I need to unpack this with you, Jenny, because you increase my threshold of knowledge in this area, right? You help me to see things that sometimes I can't see myself. And that's what this model is this is why this model is so exciting for me, is that what it really does is, yes, it asks you to ask a question. And if you don't take away anything else from this, that's the one thing you can do. But the brilliance of it is that you can now answer the question with something that comes from you, sure. Or you could ask an educator, somebody in your community who knows a little more than you, or somebody who specializes in what your question is about. Or you could go online and specifically read things about this particular question that you have. And we're living in the information age, so there is a lot you could really do to increase this threshold of knowledge, right? But that's the fun thing. Then you can land on something and run an experiment. Well, isn't this exciting? You know the whole story about my dad, right? And we've talked about my dad a lot, and it's my story to share. So I really only want to share that my dad is a scientist, and for a little while we were not connected. And during the retreat, I worked a lot on that because it was hard for me to not be connected with him. And I healed a lot of that for me during that time. I really did. And I came out of it and I was just like, okay with whatever relationship we ended up having. But guess what? Since then, we've really become very close again. And it's been really fun for us to have this relationship. And what this model did for me was it actually brought me closer to his work, because he's a scientist. And I started thinking about things in terms of method. And I was really jazzed, to write something that connected to the work that he loves to do, right? That's something that he's lived his whole life within. And it was just honestly a full circle kind of moment for me, where I brought in this moment of learning about business from this brilliant teacher of mine. And then, kind of like making that bring this into awareness that wow, this is actually really something I have been doing. And what is this about? And I think this could help. This could help a lot of kids. I want you to ask more questions, but I do need to eventually tell you about the fact that once I started writing this model, which I do in a weekend, as soon as I get an idea, I'm in a hole, and everybody in this house knows to just, Mary's writing a book, just leave her alone. But I immediately then start playing it out in my work. That's another thing I do, right? So I'll eventually tell you about that. But if there's questions, I'm going to pause in case there's something here that you're popping about.
Oh my goodness. Yes, there is. In a minute, I want you to actually tell us what the model is, all the parts. But I don't want to miss that. Everybody's probably on pins and needles going, what? What is it? But what I want you to hear is just to reinforce what Mary just said. It's not limited to students, right? It's not limited to the classroom, the teacher. You use that to heal a relationship. It was a catalyst in some way, without being defined yet, in how you approached and healed and made the opening in the space for a better, healthy relationship and connection to your dad. And that's why I get excited, because we need it in our classrooms. I see the job that teachers have today, and they don't really have time to ask those questions. They need everyone to, do what they're told and sit where they need to be, and they get burnt out. They went into teaching because they loved to teach, right? They went in with good intention, and then I see them all, still loving it, but being kind of frustrated or burned out. And so to me, I want to share a little short story to have you comment on this. Is when one of my kids was in the 4th grade, Peter, and he was really struggling with the transition to this new classroom, new teacher, same school, same friends, but we discovered that he had a deficit in his eye muscles. They would focus when he was reading, when he looked at the chalkboard up at the front, whatever they're called, the whiteboard now, up at the front of the classroom, his eyes couldn't adjust to read it. It wasn't that he needed glasses, because he could stare at it long enough that it would then come into focus. So they said it's muscular, right? And they were not identifying it. They did the eye screening and said something's there. And I'm like, okay, what is it? Went to an eye doctor, went to another one, who finally said he's got to exercise his eye muscle. He's got laziness in the hind part of the eye. And he had to do things like we would stand 10 feet apart with a piece of yarn, and I would hold one end and Bob would hold the other, and one of his siblings had a big button on it, and he would watch the button go 10 feet away and come back. And we'd have to do that exercise of him focusing long distance and bringing it back to close up. And it was really huge to understand that was the challenge he was having. But the teacher, to this day, we roll our eyes because this teacher refused to accommodate and help him win. And so he also, because of that, became a very auditory learner. If she read the homework assignment, he didn't need anything else. He would remember every word of it. But she would notice him writing it down. He never could finish writing it because he'd have to look at the board and then write it down. And she failed him because he wouldn't write it down before she erased it. And she wouldn't let him have extra time or stay in at recess. She was, no, he can't, even with this doctor's report. So you come upon that in a classroom, like, are we that rigid? Are we that prescribed? Thank goodness with 5 kids going through a system, that was the only time I think I encountered, maybe one other time, a teacher that just refused to accommodate. So what do you say to listeners if they're running up against some of that and they want to share this model with the teacher or whomever, is going to be most empowering to the student to be able to learn? How do you deal with that? Or is that was a long time ago for me and maybe it doesn't exist anymore, but I kind of feel like it probably does.
It does. It does. And I guess what I would just say is that I have so much to say, and I'm going to teach the model very quickly before I answer, but it's also in the way the teachers are trained, and it's some of it is systematic, right? Like you have to understand, teachers are trained as people who are assessing, that means testing, right, children, and marking them as to where they are in their quote unquote mastery or development of what they're teaching. And so it is a little finite in how they are trained to think about things and how they're also maybe communicating about your child. I see this a lot in teachers where they'll say, your child isn't reading the board. Your child is bothering Tommy. Your child is poking at this kid. And there's like a laundry list. Sometimes parents get these emails where there's just these statements like, this happened and this happened and then, whoa, this happened. And guess what? Then this happened and then this happened. And I just wanted you to know this happened too. And parents will receive this information and it can be very triggering because it feels like, so very, where do you go with any of that? I mean, it's sort of, it feels personal sometimes. It feels like you're supposed to go in and solve the problem for them, but you're not in the classroom. So it's awkward. Right? I mean, it's really difficult. Yeah. So let me teach you the model and I'll share how I would use it in the case of your 4th grader. Okay. So there are 5 steps, sorry, I said 4, but there's 5 steps to the model, really 4 are sort of most important, but 5 steps. The first is to identify the challenge. So I don't really necessarily call that a step, but it is a step. It's saying, in this case, my child has this condition. Let's say you know about it, right? And the statement is, the teacher is not accommodating him in terms of what he needs in order to read what's on the board and also take the notes and see what's on his desk, right? Let's just say that's the statement that we now have. Now you need to formulate a question. Now, the good news about this question is that it could come to the teacher, which I would always invite the teacher to the question, right? But I would also invite the student to the question. And so there was just a book, Mel Robbins just put out the book, Let Them. And there's a lot of, obviously this is a really great idea and it's really true. Like it's control what you can control and let go of what you can't kind of stuff. And, sometimes we can offer the teacher the question, but the teacher may stay where they are. And it really becomes up to the student though, to get a little control where there isn't a lot of control. And this is, I think, what this model gives a lot of power to, right? It's really empowering all the stakeholders actually, right? So, and then I'm going to keep going with the model and then I'll come back and I'll work it through. After you set up that question, right, which is maybe to the teacher, like, how can this student with this condition see what's on the board and see what's on the table? How can the student do that? That's the question. The how questions are really great. How? Start there. Okay. Now you just ask. And maybe sometimes you have to wait. We all want the answer right away. But you could also say, listen, I get this is a big question. I'll give you another day or two. Think about it. We'll come back to the table. Be patient with people. They're not always going to come right back to you and be as quick as you are maybe to problem solve, right? If anybody knows that, it's me, because I'm like 5 steps already there. I mean, I have to slow down sometimes. Everybody could benefit, I think, from giving people room to really think about this. Okay, so now hopefully the teacher now has maybe come up with something. But if they haven't, what you can do is you can increase their threshold of knowledge. And now you, as the parent who's the advocate, who's now getting your PhD in what your child has, is going to go to the internet and, to all the experts or whatever, and get some really nice ideas that come from people that are experts in this area. And write them down in really nice, easy ways to understand, don't overwhelm, right? But increase the threshold of knowledge to help. What we call step 3 is develop the hypothesis, right? The hypothesis is something we're going to try. And you could use that little trick that we parents use, which is give them 2 options and tell them to pick one if you really need to, right? So like go to the teacher and say, this person suggests that this could happen, and this person suggests that this could happen. Which one do you think would work, right? Again, look, I'm using a question still, which is kind of causing the teacher's brain to be a little irritated, because the teacher's now going to really look for the answer. It's just going to happen. And there's studies in the book I share that tell you why this happens. It's just a thing. Okay, now what you're going to do though is you're going to say to the teacher, all right, she says, fine, we'll try this. And let's say she's totally unenthused, but she's like, well, we'll try this. Fine. I mean, that's a win right there. Great. We're going to try something. Now it becomes the idea though, is we can't just assume it's working. And we can't assume that teacher has the time to gather the data, because it's not maybe something they're going to do. But we do want to know if it's working, because it could be that we try something and it doesn't work. And this is something that I need every listener to really understand. You said it really beautifully in the intro, which is I had 5 kids, and guess what? Every single one of your kids has a unique brain. And this is what makes educational research really hard, because we love to say this is an evidence-based, research-based approach. Okay, that's great, but what if it doesn't work for my kid? Well, that's possible, because guess what? Your child's brain is unique. So it could be that it doesn't work because your child wasn't maybe in that particular, if you think about research, right, you have to get a pretty like not homeostasis, it's like homogeneous group, right, together to really validate your results. But it's really hard to get a homogeneous group together when you're thinking about the brain in kids. You know this, they're moving a mile a minute. One day they like this, the next day they're like, forget it, I'm good. Or they're having a problem and they're crying because they don't have this skill. And the next day they get on their bike and ride down the road and it's done, right? It's really difficult. So you got to just run the experiment. That's the whole point, right? It's not one of those experiments where we do the control group. It's actually a valid experiment where you input an intervention and you document what happens before the intervention, and then you put the intervention in and you see if it yields your hypothesis, if it's true or not. And then the 5th one is you reflect and you refine. So now you kind of look back and you say, all right, this is working. Like, I think we have enough data to say that this is something we should continue down the road with. Or that hypothesis did not work. That's okay. We need to now think of something else to put in. We now still have this unanswered question.
Right. So you go back to the question.
Yeah. So you just go back, right? So for the 4th grade situation, right, I talked to you about how I would work with the teacher, right? I would just kind of say to the teacher what I said. But for your child, this is where the fun stuff is, right? Because you can just say to him, hey, listen, what are we going to do if your teacher doesn't accommodate you in this regard? Like, what can we do? How can you move through this if this isn't going to be accommodated? And then just kind of let it be for a little bit, give it a little space, go on a walk maybe, and then say, I was reading. Have you been reading about that question? I was wondering, maybe you Googled it or ChatGPT'd it or whatever, or went on TikTok, as the kids do sometimes, to look for little tricks, and see what they can come up with, right? Because you're not in their body. You don't know what their brain is experiencing. But like you said, I would argue your son found a way, because as a result of not having that accommodation, he improved his auditory learning, which is a compensation that happened. Now, is that what we would like? Maybe not, but maybe so, right? Maybe that was a good thing. And, we can kind of hang our hat on that. So that's a little bit of where that comes from. I hope that helps.
Yes, absolutely. Because I went to the teacher with solutions, not questions. And then it became a little like I got in a power struggle with her because I was telling her how to do her job. And then when that didn't go over well, I went to over her head to the principal and said, we have a problem. This is what I recommended, though I was the expert, and really didn't involve her in the process. And, looking back, there were silver linings that emerged out of that because he actually taught himself that year to be a visual learner. He can memorize. He would read 5 homework assignments. He can go back and still see it if he focused and didn't write it down and memorized it. And he's to this day, I could give him 10 things to get at the grocery store and he doesn't have to write them down. He gets them all. And he applies it to fathering his children, discipline, everything. He uses those skills. And so it led him in a positive direction because he used it and hyper developed other gifts. But looking back, it would have been much more collaborative to pose that as the question, to incorporate that very important question about what should we do? What are your thoughts? This is what we know, but what would be the plan? And find out why it was so hard for her to not leave the homework up for a day. So he had the ability to stay after school and write it down. And we just ended up with a whole year. It was a terrible year, because that set the precedence between him, her, and me in a teacher-student parent dynamic that just never got better. It just never got better. And it made him, one of the not great things that came out of that is that it made him not like school and not like to learn. And if he can't respect the teacher, he doesn't let the teacher teach him. And so all through his 12 years of school, that from that point on, he wasn't competent as a student. And he found his way around that. He's a very, very successful and good chef. And so he made the kitchen his classroom, and it worked great because that's what he chose to do. So it turns out, and I think that's a message too for people who are maybe having those kind of years or being frustrated, because I had 5 kids and I just thought everybody would learn the same and do the same things. And oh my goodness, I was constantly increasing my threshold of knowledge that it doesn't mean that they're going to all need the same thing or learn the same way. And that meant I had to be on my toes to come up with 5 different things, for children going through different classes and stages of development. And so the other part that I think in describing the model is that it empowers everyone, and that's really important to not overlook a 4th grader as if he didn't have the answer.
Exactly.
I'm looking back at all the times that I took the wheel and didn't really help them develop that sense of self-advocating, good self-esteem. It does a lot when you can include them in the question and then in the problem solving. So I love this.
Yeah. I love it so much too. And I would say, just like I said in the earlier part of this talk, I said, as soon as I sort of wrote it up and I started utilizing it in my business, I turned around and started playing around with it in my actual practice of working with students. And I want to tell you another story, which was where I knew this worked. I was like, okay, I really got to sit down and write this down, because this was just the stuff of miracles. I mean, so I was working with a child who is, let's just kind of like generally say, right, he's middle school and he's in a math class. And I think everyone will really relate to this, right? It's like the teacher is marking him off for these careless errors at the end of his problems. He's like missing a sign, or he just transposes a number, or he doesn't explain fully in the exact proper mathematical language, but he gets the idea, but he's not quite there, right? And it's frustrating because he's getting these points off, and now he's like, I'm getting a B. And this is a high achieving student who's like basically feeling his worth from getting A's. And so now he's getting a B, and now he's getting a low B, and he's like, oh my goodness, I'm terrible at math. That's where this is the internal dialogue. Okay. Then we have the teacher who is just saying, in the statements on the side, like, mind your signs, be careful of this. So there's statements coming back to the student, but just like the teacher, where you gave those statements to the teacher, right? Do this. I have a solution for this, right? Guess what? The student is just completely also tuning those out because, by the way, this is all getting internalized within a place where the student is in a negative place. They're not in a positive place. So it's just feeding into this negative energy and it's not productive. So I come in and I'm playing around with this and I sit him down in my office and I take out a blank sheet of paper. Anybody can do this. So this is my gift to everybody who's working with middle school kids in math. Okay. You can do this. Take out the sheet of paper and divide it into, I think it was 3, but maybe it'll be 4. I can't remember exactly, but it was like a, computer sheet of paper and you divide it in, let's say 3 sections. We wrote down the problem, right? And then we wrote down like what the error was that he made. So it's like, okay, I missed the sign in this particular problem. And then I asked the question. It was 4 sections. I'm going to tell you why. So it was the problem. It was the what the error was. And then I said, how can I not make this mistake going forward? And then I had him think about that and write it down over here. And he said, I just don't see it to me. He's saying that to me. And I said, oh, how could you see it? And he's like, well, I guess I could shade it in a little harder. So I could really it would really pop out at me. All right. I mean, that seems like a great idea. Why don't you write that down? I'm going to shade in my signs. We did this for every problem that he got wrong, just exactly like I said. I took a picture of it. The teacher, who also had been very rigid, like the teacher you encounter, right? And saying, no, sorry, there's no, this is what we're doing. And he has to study more. Maybe he needs some special services, some special tutoring. This was what the recommendation was, right? And I videotape myself explaining the model to her. And I say, when I get a student like this is what I do. And I showed her the 4 columns. And I said, and so I'm going to invite you also to this exact question. Like, if you have more ideas, how can he stop making these careless errors in this sign area? Or how can he remember the precise mathematical language? Is there something more we can do? How can he do this? And I literally just taped it out and then I typed it out as well for her so she could have it in a couple of modalities because that's the teacher that I am. And I send it to her just like that. So it doesn't happen overnight, but I will say in the next maybe 2 weeks, you would not believe the email that came to the mom. It was an email of ideas from the teacher. It was an idea email. And she said she's been thinking about this child and she has some ideas that could help. And the mom sends it to me and I text back to the mom and I say, look at her, coming up with ideas.
Imagine that.
And so all of a sudden now, by the way, this student is now we see this breath, this energy change from the student. But now, guess what? The 2 of them are meeting and there is a dialogue happening and a more of a rich understanding of the student. And he doesn't need to go to more tutoring. He doesn't, it's like we've stopped the dialogue of I'm a bad math student because you're really not. You just need to learn, but you do need, and here's the thing that I do want to share. In math, guys, we do need to have the right sign and we do need to have the right math language. And we do also need to have the right, the right, I mean, there are things we have to do, right? So it's not like, and the teacher, I think, is sometimes being bombarded with parents saying, why do you care about this? You're breaking him down. Let him be a little bit, like a lot of those statements, right? Protective statements, right? And the teacher, of course, is coming at it and being like, but I'm right. So, I mean, listen, it's all so, and this was such a proud, I mean, this is just the work coming through me. You have to understand, right? I understand that. And it's just me experiencing the work. And then my medium of sharing it is writing it down and then putting it into practice and coming on podcasts like this and saying, just take it and it'll be an energy change for you. Right. And it's so thrilling. I just live in that story. It's so much fun to see him and her.
That's the reward. And isn't it funny how you can have so much going wrong and then have something like that come through that just it negates all the hard parts when you get those moments of feedback that brings such joy to watch a student. I've always loved the movie, and there's an old original one. I can't think of the actress who played Helen Keller, but they reenact the moment when she starts to realize, I'm learning a language, I'm learning something, and it started to click. And that's what it reminds me of, is when you have those moments when the model works and you get the feedback of it. And it's just such a good feeling that you liberate that child to then not have those negative thoughts about their ability to learn or not learn.
But it's not all positive. I think there's definitely some challenges that we have within our systems. And like I said before, sometimes what we question doesn't go anywhere, but we can always ask our children the question of, how are you going to handle this if the system can't change for you, right? Or you can't have the teacher be what you want it to be, right? And I think that's also an empowering message for parents, in that you don't need everything in school to go perfectly for your child for them to actually develop and grow and be healthy and whole. And so this model allows for some of that parenting work to happen, which I know everyone who's a parent is ultimately interested in. And I've been working on it with my kids too, and it's been really helpful to just hear their ideas. And it does allow you to connect. It's very fun that way.
It feels so relational. It really does feel like it's not just about getting better grades or better mindsets about learning or anything. It's just really empowering and enhances the relationship. So if you didn't even involve the teacher and just ask the question of the child and take the time, I think there is that need to listen when you do ask the question. Listen to exactly what is it that they come up with, whoever it is. That's a really important part of it too, is, not to just ask the question and let go, but give that, what I hear you saying, or what I'm hearing that you're suggesting is that right? And let them feel heard and honored. And that's huge. So another question that I have is that, in the days that I went to school, the classrooms were very different. In my elementary school, there were two classes, the fast group and the slow group. And it wasn't a stigma, but it was. It was. Now, things have evolved in the educational systems. But what do you do when a child stops thriving? Or what are signs that make you go, okay, obviously, just asking a question may not be enough. So that at what point, because I was a hands off, when they were in school, that was their teacher. And if you had a problem with her, then, I would have a problem with you. And so, but I took the time to go in and find out and ask questions. And then my mama bear would come out, and I would, if I felt that my child was not being treated respectfully or fairly, then I got involved. I'll just say that. But even then, having this model, using it that way, I wish that, at my age, I wish I could have a do-over with all my kids, because it's oh, now I'm learning all this stuff. But, I'm watching my grandchildren, and what they are doing in school and how they approach school and what reinforces the goodness of education and teaching them. The one thing that I always wanted more than good grades was a love of learning, because I have such a love of learning. It's I'm not stopping just because school stops. I am constantly wanting to expand and grow and learn new things. And that I wanted to instill in my children, that it wasn't a place that they had to go every day. It was a place that they loved to go every day and come home with things that they learned, because their little brains are absorbing everything so fast. But what do you say to the modern day classroom? I feel for our teachers. I feel they have so much that they have to do. They have to write up reports on behaviors. They have to fill out the forms for special accommodations. There's so many behaviorally based criteria that the teacher has to jump through those hoops on top of teaching. And I'm not even sure what my question is, except to that was a long roundabout way to say, what can a parent do in those situations that helps the child thrive in the classroom, but also the teacher? Like, what do teachers need?
Yeah. I mean, I do think they need questions. I think that they need that empathy that you just brought in, which is really about respecting the fact that they really do have so much on their plate. I mean, I've made some mistakes in the past in my career. I'm not currently teaching in the classroom. I did teach for many years, but it's always come from good intention. But one of our tutors, for example, wrote to a teacher some ideas like, I just shared, like, here's some ways that this child could really benefit from learning. Well, just think of that's a perfect example of a really well-intentioned tutor who really wants to help this kid, right? That's where she's coming from, no other place. But then the teacher reads it and she's like, I mean, I'm not saying that this is what happened, but it could happen, right? Is like, I mean, have you seen what my day is like? Like, I can't do one more thing. You got to be kidding me. Like, don't give me 5,000 things to do. And by the way, you don't even know what I do. You don't know what's happening here. And so there becomes that resistance only because really there isn't space. There isn't room for that to be received. So I think the questioning allows a teacher to also say what they can handle. And that's an important one, right? So just asking that question, then whatever they come back with is like, oh, okay, that's also telling me how much they can really do here. And now I, as a parent, can sort of we teach in my company this, it's a circle, and it's called the total educational process. You can't see me, but I'm holding my fingers together to make a circle. And the one side, which is sort of a half moon, is what happens at school. And the other side is what happens at home. And it kind of comes together and brings the child, right, in their total educational experience. And whether you homeschool or you're, and you're at home, it's still really two different sides of the circle, right? And so you're thinking about this always and saying, well, if the school can't do it, then I just need to figure out how we're going to accomplish that at home, or if we're just going to drop it. I mean, that's another option, right? It's just sometimes there's just too many balls in the air and we're not going to work on that thing right now, right? We'll do it later or whatever. These are all okay things to do. But you also asked another question earlier, which I did want to address. And you're like, how do you know when your kid, like, a question isn't enough? And, you're maybe asking the question, the teacher is now indicating that I'm not going to be able to do anything, but your child now is, you get a sense, you have this feeling that things are just not progressing correctly. And how do you kind of know that? Well, I think that the answer really is in the first, you're going to feel something, because as a connected parent, which I think most people listening are, you're going to feel something about this. But the key is to watch patterns. I think patterns are really interesting. If it keeps happening, right, that's when you really want to notice. If I keep not wanting to go to school and it really doesn't change, over time, or I keep telling you, my mom, that I'm really bad at this, or I keep failing something, like I'm just not doing well in this course, or, whatever it is, those are the things that you then need to say, okay, I may not have a partner at school, but I've got to now, I call it, and I'm not taking credit for this word. I learned from another teacher of mine, Beth Pilchek, but she said, you're constantly as a parent on a bench. And the bench is where you sit, and then whoever is kind of supporting your parenting, sometimes there's nobody there, which is, kind of something else interesting, but, put people on there, right, who will kind of help you out. And that can be free, or it could be paid, or it could be, your grandparent who used to be a teacher. But like, really, you need people on the bench for most of your kids. And you need to be able to turn to them and say, this isn't happening. Could you figure this out? I mean, I know for one of my sons, for example, he was very, very sad during one part of his life. He was really sad. And I turned to his coach, his private coach, and I said, is there something, I need you to know this is happening. And is there something more you could do to help him? And he was like, so happy I asked. He was like, yes, I can come in and I can be this, right? So sometimes that's a little bit of where you need to go. But I do call those moments, so I feel like we're kind of usually moving along in more of like a linear fashion in education, because kids are evolving and they're building on their skills. But every once in a while, something happens and you need to take like a left turn or a right turn. Those are those moments, right? Like if your child's having an illness, a death in the family, a divorce, a move, some kind of recent diagnosis that's come to be that you now understand, like any of those things really do require you to kind of pick things up and go, okay, we're going this way. But I love that kind of discussion, and I think it also lies in sort of what you as a family value. That's another thing I do want to talk about. That might be my next book, although I've been pondering if it is. But it's like there's something about values that I think are very interesting and that they really help anchor a lot of this. Because some things that your best friend might point out are irritating to them in school, right, may not really matter to you. And then you start to think, well, should I care about that? And it messes with you a little bit. So a really another really good tool is to kind of get clear on what you really do value. And you might need to do that often because your kids are changing a lot. And so what they show you will influence your values too, right? So that's another piece of work that I think is kind of interesting.
I love that being woven into the conversation because so much of it does boil down to that, right? Like your work ethic or what matters more, and all the things your parenting has to be. If you're not clear of what those are, then they're not getting solidified elsewhere. So knowing that and then approaching it. There was a podcast that Kristen and I did, I don't remember which one or how long ago, about stressed out, anxious moms and how hard it is being just a mom, whether or not she's a working mom or a stay-at-home mom. They're so stressed out all the time because stuff is happening. Their kids there's just so much and we're so busy. And I think that we try to keep our kids busy and engaged in stuff. And what about that? Like the need for, I feel that children are bombarded in the information world of school. And there's a time I need, to be able to rest my mind, to decompress, to really integrate what I got from that day. And we are, as stressed out moms, like keeping them busy, go from school to basketball practice to do your homework before we hit to the swim practice or, whatever. And it's so much. We keep our busy schedules that thinking about, oh, so now what you're telling me is that I sit down and say, well, how do you think, there's a little bit of the slowness to the model that I think moms might respond to if they already feel strung out, like there's no more room, like you were mentioning. And what do you say to them because I feel like without that, the mom or the dad being able to lead the way with that and to partner with their teachers and their child, to really be the leader. That's to me the leadership part of this. But if they're not leading because they're spinning in circles too, there's so much that falls through the cracks. And it has to be really devastating when that happens for a long term because of the mindset, the things that we make up, as Peter for a long time after that incident happened and we had such a hard time because his eyes wouldn't focus, he felt like he was stupid. And to this day, if someone makes him look or feel stupid, it's such a trigger because he's not, he's actually very brilliant and nobody likes being called that. But there's a lot of those things. Like I feel like the teachers have their hands full and so do the moms. And I just guess I want to say, what's a question to ask the moms on this who are listening to come up with a way to use this model?
You just have to start at the top. It's like identify the challenge. And I think that it depends on your child because, for example, I personally have, I have 3 kids and 2 of them thrive when they're extremely busy. Mm-hmm. In that if I don't have them doing something, and I'm very much like this too. So if I don't have a weekend where I have things planned, I don't really feel very well. And it doesn't need to be work, but it needs to be going out, socializing, taking a walk. I don't do well just sort of, or reading a book even could be what I do. But my other child is the kid who we had him going, just like everybody else, because we were all like, oh, we're all the same, And at a certain point, he just sort of stopped. What kids will do is they will show you with their behavior typically before their words. So you really want to watch their behavior and you want to say, what's that about is maybe the question that you want to ask, right? So like my kid would just sort of start getting sick and not go to something in the afternoon, right? Or he would go a little late because didn't really want to be there, right? And didn't really have to do with the activity. But at a certain point, I said, hey, I noticed that you're not really into this. Like it got to be that, semester change. And he's like, yeah, it's too exhausting. Like and I think he was pretty articulate about it at that point. But then I realized my mom actually said to me, she goes, I think he's the kind of kid that just needs like one thing in the afternoon. Likes his home. He likes to just decompress, be on his own, have his own like chill time. And I listened, and I said, okay, yeah, I'm gonna respond. That's my hypothesis. I'm gonna check that out, right? So I think the question is just how you can identify the challenge. The advice, just going back, is watch the behavior, especially for the youngest kids. They're going to show you with their behavior when they're having the tantrums, when they're losing their minds, right? When they're really like just having a hard time, it's usually like an overstimulation of some kind. So you want to then ask like, I wonder what this is about. Let me see if I could bring things down a little bit. Let's see if that helps, right? Yeah. But listen, to go back to the parent thing, I mean, this brings me full circle. So we maybe want to end up, here at the end of the day. But remember, I started this model because I was running a business and I was interjecting myself into everybody else's work with problems and ideas that I had in mind for this particular body of work. And then what their experience was like every time I would pick up the phone or call them, they're like, oh God, she's coming in with a new idea. Like, we just finally got that idea going. I don't know what is going to happen now. Like, what problem are we solving today? And this model has allowed everybody in the group that has a responsibility like list. There's a couple of responsibilities, and then they get to work the model with those responsibilities, like, and make, identify challenges within those responsibilities and ask a question and run a hypothesis. And my feeling is everybody's doing well here as long as they have that model literally going. If they're not meeting the objective, I'm okay with that as a leader, as long as they're positively working through the learning process. So you as a parent could actually think of yourself as the helm, which you are, you're the leader of your child's learning life, right? But you don't need to jump in and anticipate everybody's problems in your family and make sure the milk is here and make sure that everyone has food and make sure everyone has got the doctor appointments. And because this is what parents are doing, right? There are just so many different things. You could write responsibilities down for each of your members of your family, and little kids can still have responsibilities, by the way. They should, they want to, right?
Right.
And then you can run the model and basically say, okay, so what's your goal this week with this living room getting clean every night? Like, what you thinking about here, right? And seriously start managing things from that lens, because I think we just run ourselves ragged because we assume the responsibility of all the things. And yes. I think there's something I need to learn in that teaching too, by the way. So I'll put myself right in the seat of your listener right there and have to listen to this again and be like, Mary, remember what you said, because now you have to do it. That's a good one. Yeah, it's tough, man. I mean, it is all the things that you said.
And it's all the things, to kind of learn how does my child learn? How does my child take in information and retain it? Like, how do I set them up for success? And all 5 of them be different answers, but every 6 months it changed. In some of the cases, I'm like, well, it quit working and I have to go back and troubleshoot again. But in that case, what does remain constant is evaluating as they grow and have their own life experiences and teacher experiences and classmate experiences, their success or their failure, like your math student, who was feeling like he was just never going to be good at math, and having those situations be addressed. But if you just stay in the model, you will quickly grow with them because you have to keep up with them. Their brain is growing fast and furious, and you have to keep running. And I remember thinking just about the time I mastered and I was able to juggle all 5 of them pretty darn well, suddenly I'm missing, 4. And so it's like, if I can just stay connected to this process, it leads you where you need to go. And it's not stagnant. Nothing is stagnant in this situation that you can just say, this is how they do it. And you do it for 12 years. It doesn't work that way, I don't think. Looking at mine, I don't think. So, Mary, you have a book that is at the time of the recording, hitting the bookstores and the bookshelves at the time that this is published, you are well on your way to your 15th successful book, which congratulations again. I think for like my whole life, it's been, I'm going to write a book one day. And I think, oh, I'm never going to have enough time now. And you are so inspiring in how you, like what you said, that one little thing that had nothing to do with what we're talking about, but you got the concept and your family knows she's downloading and writing a book about this concept, and you spend your whole weekend doing it, and then voila. But you've got other books that are equally as passionate and powerful and helpful in it as an educator, especially. But I think we're all educators, so they apply, to parenting and beyond. So I encourage our listeners to find you. In our show notes is your website, as well as a link to get this last book about how to ask powerful questions and how that can change a student's life and trajectory toward their own success. And so I'm excited to order my copy of The Power of Questioning. So thank you. I can't believe it's been so long that I'm just getting you here as a podcast guest, but we made it, and you'll probably be back knowing all the questions that still remain in my brain. But thank you for taking time today to be on our podcast. I absolutely know our listeners, not all are, dealing with this yet, or some are empty nesters and some are in the thick of it. And so if you are in the thick of it with raising your children and getting them educated in whatever modality that you work in, I hope you'll read Mary's book and stay connected to her. Her website gives you all kinds of other information. Just a little last question. If someone wanted a consultation or, what's the best way to reach out to you? I know you're a busy lady and you don't need 100 random emails coming in, but what would be a way if someone really had a difficult time placing their child into a setting where they can thrive, whether it's special needs or not? I think they're all special needs, to be honest. But what's the best way for people to find you? Just go to your website?
Yes. I mean, listen, sometimes I'm the best person to work with you. Sometimes somebody on my team is. That's why I really intentionally built the business this way, and that I benefit from the other expertise on this team. So the best thing to do is just to go to our website and fill out our form. Then we have a complimentary exploration call with you. One of our folks does, and, we kind of get to know what you need. We work with students, I say from 1 to 21, but, we have adults in here too sometimes doing some stuff with us. So I don't necessarily limit that way, but I am a certified college counselor, so I work with students on some of that process in conjunction with this work too. So, I think it's just important to know that we're here. I do also have ways of consulting. I'll share my personal consulting page, which sort of, shares if you really just want to book a quick, 30 or hour long call with me to solve something that's going on. We can usually settle it up in that time. You can definitely do that. We'll put that in the show notes. Because listen, I feel like I want to be helpful. And I certainly, if I can walk you through something that will impact your child and your learning, no matter where you are, I would love to hear from you. So, feel free to be in touch. It's what I thrive off of doing. So happy even emails, whatever, it's all good. I'll get to y'all eventually, right? As soon as I can. But listen, Jenny, this has been amazing. I just love being with you, and I'm very grateful that my friend Lindsay introduced me to you and that we've been able to stay in touch. And, Jenny's been a really big part of our family in that, she did coaching with my husband and I. She's done stuff with just me. I've, of course, shared any of my ideas I can with her. I feel like we're just kind of that way with each other. But I know this community is really special. And, anybody who's listening, I hope, knows the depths at which your work goes. And it's absolutely impacted me to be able to be brave enough to sit down and write a book and share these ideas. And it's what I can do, So, yeah. So,
and you do it well, and you make it look easy. So, but
I have a wonderful editor, Rochelle Borer, and if anybody ever wants to work with somebody who could help them with that process, she is a very special individual. So it's not alone that I walk these journeys. So I appreciate.
Yeah, it takes a village.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Mary. And to all of those of you out there listening, I hope you took away a lot of golden nuggets. I know I did, and I'm going to be passing them along to my kids for my grandchildren, or I'll use it with my grandchildren that are in those struggles in the classroom, some of them. So, but please comment, like, love, or whatever you do to recognize you enjoyed this podcast. And you can always write out to me and we can hear some of your needs. But if it's educational and all the things that we just talked about, I will have in the show notes the ways that you can reach out to Mary. But also, if you don't have kids struggling or going through school or anything like that, but you know someone who does, please share this episode with them. It does take a village. And I think, just saying, hey, would it help to listen to this? They had some interesting concepts and I just wanted to share, and then let them decide if it's going to be something they want to listen to or not, right? Let them. So remember, whatever style of education you choose for your kids, the greatest model is when you remember to teach and guide them with love. So Mary, thank you again. And listeners, thank you for supporting our little podcast and community. And everyone, take care. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you found a spark of wisdom to carry with you, and maybe even a deeper invitation to heal and grow and transform through your own beautiful story. Or maybe this episode made you think of someone who could use encouragement. And if so, I hope you will share it with them. If you'd like to learn more about working with me or attending one of my healing retreats, coaching programs, and other offerings, you can visit my website at jennyaiello.com or email me directly at jenny@jaiello.com. You'll find all the links in the show notes. If today's episode touched you, it would mean the world if you would leave a review or share it with someone who might need it, or just reach out and let me know how it landed for you. I'd love to hear from you. I'm building something special here. Real stories, real life, real connection. One episode, one heart, and one story at a time. As always, with love. Oh, and this is the legal message, but mostly a message from my heart. And I just need to share this with you right now. Please know this podcast is offered solely for educational and entertainment purposes. If you find yourself triggered due to anything that was shared in this podcast, please seek professional help. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for mental health services. While I am a professional life coach, I am not a psychotherapist, nor am I a mental health clinician. So if you are struggling emotionally, please seek help, because you matter, you are important, and most of all, you are worthy of doing this work, the work that leads you to a better and healthier place. Okay? All right. Thank you. And please always make enough time to take care of yourself, and do so with love.